اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. الشمس والقمر بحسبان. والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء ووضعها الميزان. ألا تطغوا في الميزان. وعقيكهة والنخل ذات الأقمام. والحب ذو الأسف والريحان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار. وخلق الجان من مارج من نار. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. رب المشركين ورب المغربين. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. وله الجوارح المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. كل من عليها فان. ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يسأله من في السماوات والأرض كل يوم هو في شأن فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان سنفرغ لكم أيها الثقلان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يا معشر الجن والإنس إن استطعتم تنفذون بالأقطار السماوات والأرض فانفذوا لا تنفذون إلا بالسلطان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يرسل عليكم شواظ من نار ونخاس فلا تنتصران فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فإذا انشقت السماء وكانت وردة كالدهان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيومئذ لا يسأل عن ذنبه إنس ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يعرف المجرمون بسيماهم فيؤخذ بالنواسي كالأقدام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان هذه جهنم التي يكذب بها المجرمون يطوفون بينها بين حميم آن فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ولمن خاف مقام ربه جنتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ذواتا أفنان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما عينان تجريان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما كل فاكهة وزوجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على فرش بطائنها من استبرق وجنى الجنتين الدان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهن كاسرات الطرف لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان كأنهن ياقوت والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ومن دونهما جنتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مدهامتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما عينان ناضاقتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما فيهما فاكهة ونخل ورمان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما خيرات حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان حور مقصورات خيام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على رفرف خضر وأبقر حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان تبارك اسم ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك الإثم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع متضرع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانيا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من استدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وأزم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم أزم سلطانك ولا مكانك وخفي مكرك وزهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوب غافرا ولا لقبائه ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترت وكم من فاده من البلاء يقلت وكم من إثار وقيت وكم من مكروه دفعت وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرت. اللهم عزم بلائي وعفرت بالسوء حالي وكسرت بأعمالي وقادت بأغلالي وحبسني النفس بعد عملي وخدتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي. يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملت في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور يتوفا. إلهي وربي من لغيرك أسأله كشف ذري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكم اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أحوى وأسأده على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك وخالفت بعض أوامرك. فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد آتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا. لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في ساعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ذري وفكني من شد وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عزمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي هبني الابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تزيي من ربيت أو تبعد من أدنيت أو تشرد من آويت أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادها وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة وعلى ضمائر هوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارح ساعة الأوطان تعبدك طائعة وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا ربي وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكسو يسير بقاء كثير مدة فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدة ويدوم مقام ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها زج وأبكي لعليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته فلا إن سيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لازجن إليك بين أهلها زجيج العاملين ولا أصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولا أبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولا أنادينك إن كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا غاية آمال العارفين يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاك طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يزج إليك زجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي فكيف يبكى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك ورأفتك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يهركه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في إتكه منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين أكتو لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاهديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما. لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي هتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمت وكل ذنب أذنبت وكل قبيح أسررت وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته وأخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جواره وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرت أو رزق بسطت أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بذري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورا وبخدمتك موصولا وأعمالي عندك مقبولا حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب قوي على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوانه وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرع إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في المبارزين وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فارد ومن كادني فكد واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وقسم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجد لي بجودك وعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقلني عثرتي واغفر لي زلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وزمنت لهم الإجابة فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني منايا ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء. يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى ارحم من راس ماله الرجاء وسلاه البكاء. يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النقم يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بي ما أنت أحلو وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत। मुसीबत की गरी और शाम के बरते हुए साए और तड़पती रह गई ماں اور علی اکبر نہیں آئے مصیبت کی گھڑی اور گزر جانا ہی لکھا ہے جوانی میں اگر یارم گزرنے سے علی اکبر کے پہلے ماں گزر جائے مصیبت کی گھڑی اور وہی اندازہ کر سکتا ہے درد قلب لیلا کا نظر کے سامنے جس کے جواب بیٹا سنا کھائے مصیبت کی گھڑی اور جوان کی لاش پیری میں اٹھانا ایک قیامت ہے یہ دن اللہ دنیا میں کسی کو بھی نہ دکھلائے مصیبت کی گھڑی اور سنبھل کر کھینچیے گا قلب اکبر سے سینہ مولا الجھ کر نوک نظام جگر بار نہ جائے مصیبت کی گھڑی اور زمین تھرا گئی اکبر کا لاشا رکھ کے ریتی پر حسین ابن علی جب شکر کا سجدہ بجا لائے مصیبت کی گھڑی اور میں ذاکر ہوں حسین ابن علی کا یہ دعا کیجے شرف یہ نسل سے میری قیامت تک نہیں جائے اور تڑپتی رہ گئی ماں اور علی اکبر نہیں آئے مصیبت کی گھڑی محمد محمد صلی اللہ علیہ
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Sayyid Hasan Rizvi, respected elders, dearest brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum, Jamia wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all marhumin listed on the screen as well as all other marhumin. Surah Mubarak al-Fatiha. Dua Shifai Maris is requested for all those in need here and elsewhere, as well as those listed on the screen. Let us recite together Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ 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 أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. Ya Allah. Let us now invite Sayyid Hasan Rizvi to please come forward for tonight's Majalis. Bar Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad salawat.
محمد وآل محمد. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة بعد الصلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. There are quite a few questions once again on Slido, but I'm going to skip it for tonight. And we're just going to speak on the topic that we have for tonight. As it is the 26th of Rajab, the famous narration tells us that we commemorate the wafat and the death anniversary as Hazrat Abu Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa When we think about Abu Talib, the main fazilat and quality and virtue that comes to mind is the support that he gave to Rasulullah. And when we think about the idea of support, we hear all these stories, about how they were in the valley and how they were sanctioned and all the difficulties that he had to suffer. And, he holds a high position in all Muslims' minds, although there obviously is a controversy amongst some small groups of Sunnis, but the general Muslim body cannot reject the amount of work and effort that Abu Talib put in for the growth of Islam and the protection of the Prophet. A lot of our understanding of the support level and the duties and responsibilities and the sacrifices that were made by Abu Talib are lost to us because we don't understand exactly the contextual history. See, a lot of these issues we hear about in Islam, right? So most of us have recognized now that when a lot of these discussions take place in the Quran, when examples are given and stories are mentioned, or specific allegories and analogies are made, we can kind of understand it. But for the Arabs of that time, it had a very, very specific meaning because there were specific stories and there was contexts. There were sometimes poetry that Allah was referring to. So when you hear that history, it completely changes your outlook, right? You get closer to the mindset of what the Arabs were dealing with at that time. And that increases and strengthens your bond with the Quran and the way that Allah really is trying to speak to us. In the same way, right, whenever we talk about the difficulties of the life of the Prophet or the Ahlul Bayt in general, we hear many things, but when more of the historical context is given to us, it strengthens our connection with them and it really increases our love for them because we really then understand how difficult their lives were and how much more their sacrifices meant. And this is especially the case with Hazrat Abu Talib because of the fact that most of us, our history, post, start of Islam is not bad, right? I mean, there's still a lot more we can go through in terms of getting deeper and deeper, but we all, I think, have a fairly general understanding of at least the Prophet's time, Imam Ali alayhi salam's time, and the first few Imams. Later on, yeah, maybe the details get a little weaker, but we have some general picture in our mind. We've heard it enough on the minbar. But when it comes to the age of Jahiliyyah, how the Arabs, the tribes and clans, how they were dealing with each other, we've only kind of heard that, mushrikeen, and they had their customs, and they were violent. We hear very vague things, but some of the details there will help change and reshape and reform our understanding of exactly the difficulties that Abu Talib had to deal with. So what I would like to do tonight, inshallah, is just share some of that background, one specific aspect, because there's obviously a lot that we have to understand about the age of Jahiliyyah. And that age of Jahiliyyah, because of all the customs and habits and culture that they had, that, having that understanding really makes you see how difficult it was for somebody like the Prophet to come out and speak out against it, to completely change the culture. But more so than that were those who were initially supporting the Prophet, who were the first ones to actually have to go against their own family members, who were the elders, like Abu Talib, an elder, a nobleman, an elite of his tribe, of his clan, who, in the face of everybody else, all his other family members, had to come out and support, Rasulullah. And this was a very, very difficult thing. So the one aspect that I want to talk about tonight, we all know that there is this pact that was formed, right? Pre-Islam, in the age of Jahiliyyah, known as Hilful Fudul, right? Some people translate it as the alliance of virtue, or the pact of people who are virtuous. We'll get into that. Before I get in there, because Abu Talib was a part of this pact, right? And so was Rasulullah. The reason why this pact, was so important, why these individuals coming together and saying that, hey, we're gonna protect other people. This was important because of the history of pacts and alliances and treaties that were made before in the era of Jahiliyyah. So I want to give that background first about these other types of hilf or ahlaf, pacts and treaties and allegiances and alliances that the Jahil Arabs were making. That'll give us some context before we open up and discuss this idea of hilful fudul. You can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, as we start mentioning these things, keep the stuff about the Arabs of that time, keep that in mind. Because these pacts work in that context. There's no law, there's no court system like we understand, like a modern nation state or a country. That system we know, tribalism. You have these powerful clans that have allegiances to a larger tribe, and tribes work together, they make pacts and alliances. This is the way that it worked out. The best sort of analogy, because it's sometimes tough to us to visualize, the way that politics and power and all these things worked out in that age is no different than, I'm sure many of you are somewhat familiar with, or have seen at least TV shows or movies about prison and jail. And the idea of people, usually being split up into gangs, Usually, you have people who are like, Nazis or like a white gang, and you have like a black gang, then the Muslims. They have these sort of groups in jail. And they all vie for power, they sell to each other. There's a whole, separate institution that exists in, a prison colony. That is pretty much what's happening in the Arab land, in the era of Jahiliyyah. These tribes and clans are all sort of fighting for power. And while doing so, in order so that the small ones, if you're a small tribe or a small clan, you're going to get wiped out easily because somebody can just come and take care of you, wipe you out. So in order to make sure that you're protected, you go and find another clan or another tribe that's willing to put you under their protection. So sometimes one small, tiny little tribe or clan will go find a big one and say, look, we want to be a part of yours. They form a pact. And they have their reasons. Maybe it's because that small tribe or clan has access to a trade route or certain items. This is how it worked. So it was power-related, socioeconomic. So sometimes these small little ones would just be part of one big one. Or you had many little ones or medium-sized ones coming together too. I mean, if any of you have played board games like Risk before, that's exactly how it was. You have people who are just playing this game back and forth in order to control, the greater Arab lands, like Hijaz, all these trade routes, money, power. Right? It sounds like a TV show or a movie, and that's exactly what it was. And that's how these things played out. So, in order to get to this idea of Hilf al-Fudul, we're going to look at two of the previous pacts and alliances that existed. And we're going to have to travel, a bit farther in the area of Jahiliyyah. We have to go back a bit more in time. And if media can load the PowerPoint, because I'm going to go through some names, and I think this hopefully will be helpful. When we talk about the different tribes that existed before and descendants, myself, I get lost in all the names. I get lost in clans and tribes. I can't, it's tough for me to understand. So hopefully this can give us some, picture. I want to start the story with all the way at the top. If we go to Qusay. Qusay is the first one that we want to look at. This is sort of the beginning part of the story that I want to go through. So Qusay ibn Kilab, he is pretty much the head of, at this time that I'm talking about, he's the head of Quraysh in Mecca. At that time, a different tribe, a different clan, Banu Khuza'a, they were the ones in charge of Mecca. So normally we're used to hearing the Qurayshis, they were in charge of Mecca, they were the ones running everything. Qusay was the first one to actually be from Quraysh to take over. Take over control and protection of the Kaaba and Mecca. He's the first Qurayshi to do so. And it's because he actually married into the tribe or the clan that was there, Banu Khuza'a, he married into them, and then the power started to go to him, and then it came to all his descendants. So his first two descendants, I cut off, this is a large family tree obviously, I cut off parts of it because I don't want you to get lost there. Qusay has two children, or two that I want to talk about at least. Abdul Manaf and Abdul Dar. These two children, right, two males, they are his inheritors and they take on the responsibilities of protecting the Kaaba and all the other responsibilities that existed at that point. Now again, let's kind of transport our mind. Remember, in Mecca, it's not just a hub for people coming in and out, selling and buying and things like that. That exists, but remember, it was a religious hub too. People were coming there for their quote-unquote Hajj. There were rituals to be performed there, right? And then obviously, this is for a different discussion, but eventually idols were introduced there too, and some people would come for that. So people would come there, they would buy and trade, and then they would, also do their worship. They do their Hajj, or whatever Hajj existed then too. The people who were the custodians and the protectors of that, they would, they had various different tasks. So for example, one of the tasks was hijaba. Hijaba meant I'm the person who has the key to the Kaaba and I'm in charge of protecting it. Somebody else was in charge of something called Darul Nadwa, which is that whenever there was a meeting that had to be held, or the people who are running the Kaaba, like the Quraysh, they had to have consultations and meetings. That was a special area there. So one person had to maintain that and run that. Another responsibility was liwa. One person from among the caretakers of the Kaaba, they had to be the alamdar and the flag bearer. So anytime they had to go out to battle, this person, the head of the tribe or whatever, they were the ones who were allowed to go and carry that alam and the flag out to war, to battle. And these were like honorable things that not everybody could do, right? These were designated things. So these first ones that I mentioned, right? Protecting the Kaaba, keeping its key. Darul Nadwa, the maintaining the place where people would meet and consult. And Liwa being the alamdar and the flag bearer. When Qusay, when he passed away, he passed these three things on to Abdul Dar, the one on the right, which eventually we'll see that, there's going to be a pact formed later under red. But just keep that in mind right now, right? So Abdul Dar, he's getting these three main things. He's the eldest in the family too. He's the elder son. The younger son, Abdul Manaf, what does he get? His father gives him two other duties. One is siqaya. He's the saqi. Right? We heard that word from Abbas, right? He is the one that when a haji comes, when the hujjaj comes, when people come to the Kaaba, he provides them with water. He's also in charge of something called rifada, which is that it's hospitality basically. Whatever they need, anybody who's coming here, we're going to take care of them. We'll provide for them. We'll receive the hosts. We'll receive the hujjaj, the pilgrims. We'll take care of their needs. So one is kind of, almost like hospitality, and the other one is almost like logistics and security and things like that. And this is how it was divided between these two sons, Abdul Manaf and Abdul Dar. At this generation, there's no issues. Once both of these brothers pass away, the children then start fighting for who gets the next responsibility. And this brings us to the next part of the story. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So now, Abdul Manaf dies. Abdul Dar dies. When they were in charge of their responsibilities, it was delegated by their father, no issues. Now these children, so now we have the clans that are forming, right? The Banu Abdul Manaf and Banu Abdul Dar. They start saying, hey, how come these guys get this responsibility and we don't? Why are they getting this and we're not? Right? They start arguing about this. Sometimes, unfortunately, it does happen even nowadays. When a parent passes away, sometimes you see that the children will argue over trivial matters of inheritance. Usually money or property, a house, a car, things like that. For them, these people were arguing over custodialship of the Kaaba, of these duties. Now, you might think who cares who carries the flag? Remember, this is like a religious duty. People are coming in. They're seen as elites. So this is not just some trivial thing. They are vying for, powers within that religious context. The person who's in charge of the Kaaba, they're seen as an elite. They have influence over other tribes. They get to call shots. So this is all power politics, happening then too. So they start, all these tribes are now kind of arguing about, who gets what power. Then that's when the first group gets formed. The one that is sticking with the tribe or the children of Abdul Manaf and a few other tribes. I'm not going to go through the names because I think we'll get lost in that. The first pact is formed known as Hilful Mutayyabin. So Hilful Mutayyabin is the descendants or the children of Abdul Manaf and some other clans. They all say, no, we're the ones who should be doing all these duties, not, your uncle's tribe or whatever it happens to be. So they start arguing about that. They make their first pact and alliance together. They say, look, if somebody from the other opposing clans and tribes, they need something at the Kaaba, they need help, we're not going to help them. If they go and fight, we're not going to, help them out. We're not going to fight with them. And basically, we're cutting them off completely. And if any one of them bothers any of us, then we're going to go to war with them, right? That typical sort of, fighting. So once all this happened, the name too, I should probably mention that. So they were known as, Hilful Mutayyabin. Mutayyabin literally means people who they've put tayyib on them. Tayyib meaning itar, right? Perfume. So that's why it's called the pact of the perfumed or the perfumed pact or the perfumed alliance. What happened is once these clans came together and they made this agreement and alliance, the way they solidified and kind of gave their bay'ah is they all dipped their hands in perfume and itar, and then they wiped their hands on the Kaaba. So they're like, this is for those of us who have done this, we are the pact of the ones who have put on this itar, this perfume. That's why they're Hilful Mutayyabin. So this happens. As soon as that happens, now the opposing side, the descendants of Abdul Dar, right? Banu Abdul Dar and other clans, they start coming together and say, look, if they're going to make a pact, then we have to make our own too. If they're going to go to fights with us, we need to solidify our power too. We have to go to war, and we have to fight for all these responsibilities that they think is rightfully theirs, right? Again, I don't want to go to all the details about which power they're fighting for, who was right and wrong. Forget all that. So they come up with their own pact, their own alliance, which is Hilful Ahlaf. Literally, it's like the pact of pacts. Like, oh, you think that your alliance is good? You think your pact is? Ours is the better pact. We have the real one. There's another name that was given, which is a bit darker, but this was also mentioned in the history books. They were called La'aqatud Dam. Literally, the blood lickers. And you're like, what is going on here? Let me explain if you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay, so why is this pact called the blood lickers? Like, okay, so the other guys, they dipped their hands in perfume and wiped it on the Kaaba. Okay, sounds nice. This group, they said once they made their pact, they killed a cow. It doesn't say they sacrificed, but they killed one, put the blood on their hands, and some of them, as disgusting as it sounds, they licked it in order to solidify this blood pact that they made. So that's why some of them called them these blood lickers, because that's what they did. Right? Disgusting, but I mean, there was a lot of disgusting jahil things that were happening in the age of Jahiliyyah, obviously, right? So now you have these two alliances, these two large groups, which were fine for a while, but then they split off, and now they're just warring and fighting. And there's differences about how far this goes down in history. Again, I don't want to give all the details because that's going to take a lot of time. Generally, what most historians say is that this, the major battles, other people had come and mediated. They said, look, stop fighting, and they would kind of stop. But there was always bad blood between these warring groups, right? I can't go through the what happened during the time of Hashim and Abdul Muttalib, and obviously the father of Rasulullah, Abdullah. But basically the bad blood and these pacts were still there, right? I mean, obviously if you factor in what happened to Banu Umayyah, then you can understand why the Umayyads hated Banu Hashim so much. But again, that's a larger conversation for some other point. But this was just constantly happening over and over again, right? Alliances and pacts and people just angry with each other, fighting for power. So we go down now, again, now this is where we're going to fast forward and go to the time of Abu Talib. If you can recite another salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So now we come to this idea. The Arabs there, some of them see, look, people are fighting constantly. There are battles happening, all over the place. Right before, there's a difference of opinion about when Hilf al-Fudul actually took place. Some say it was at around 590 in the Common Era, which is about 20 years before, 20 years after Aam al-Fil. Some say that it took place when Rasulullah was about 20 years old. Some say 5 years after Bi'tha. Regardless, there's late 500s, early 600s, Common Era, something like that. Around then, again, the fighting among the Arabs is getting intense. It's getting out of hand. It got so bad that most of you remember, right? We have 4 months in the Arab calendar, and even in the Jahil calendar, which was, Shahrul Haram. They wouldn't fight. Even though they were, people who were just constantly at war, there was 4 months that they would never fight with each other. It got so bad at one point that they started breaking these pacts, breaking these rules, these cultural rules, and they would fight during these haram months too. So one of these famous battles was called, what's the name of the battle? Harbul Fijar, literally called the sacrilegious war, because people started fighting in the months they shouldn't have been fighting. And that's when a certain member of Banu Hashim, I believe they say Zubair ibn Abdul Muttalib. So this is a brother of Abu Talib, according to some. Some say Abu Talib himself, some say it was his brother Zubair. He said, look, this is getting out of hand. People are fighting constantly. Now we're breaking our own cultural customs of fighting in haram months. We have to put a stop to this. Something is wrong with the way that we're doing things. All these pacts and alliances we're making, this is not right. There's something missing here. We have to make up for this somehow. Then the kind of straw that breaks the camel's back. They say a person, and this is the famous story that most of you have heard. They say a person from Yemen, this area called Zubaydah, he comes to Mecca. And he's in trade. He came to sell his items. He wants to sell to an individual, and there's one of these Arab noble people, Al-As ibn Wa'il. Most of you know Amr ibn al-As. This is his father, right? Both terrible people, but Al-As ibn Wa'il, he sees this person, this man from Yemen. He wants to buy his stuff. He says, okay, give me your stuff, and then I'll pay you later. The person is like, he's a foreigner, but he's like, okay, let me trust them. They're noble Arabs. Why wouldn't I trust them? Fine. But this guy, Al-As ibn Wa'il, he doesn't pay him. And he never does. He just takes his items and he goes. He's no pay. So then, and again, this person who's coming from Yemen, he's not part of Hijaz. He's not part of any of these clans or tribes. So he has no pact, no alliance, no protection, nothing. So what does he do? He's like, I have to complain to the people. So they say he went to Mount Safa at sunrise and then started complaining in the language that Arab spoke, which is poetry. I don't want to recite the whole poetry, but he recited and complained that, look, you Arabs of noble descent, this and that, somebody is madloom amongst you, and you're just sitting around doing nothing. I've heard all these great stories that you've done this and protected XYZ, and I've just been robbed. One of your own noblemen, I've sold him something, he hasn't paid me, and you're not doing anything about it. I mean, you didn't say it like that. I'm saying he composed beautiful poetry and complained like that. So he did that. And then when these individuals found out, the ones who were talking about forming a new pact, they said, that's it, this is enough, we need to do something about it. So Zubair, who heard this, he stood up, he said, come to us, we'll take care of you. Some reports say it was Abu Talib was the one who said, no, we're going to come to and take care of you. So when this happened, when they all came together, they just said, look, our pact now has to transcend tribal lines. The issue here is injustice itself. Nobody should be mazloom in our area. It doesn't matter if they're part of any sort of tribal or clan pact. It doesn't matter if they have Arab noble descent or not. If somebody has been robbed, if they've been wronged, if they've been tortured or attacked, we are going to rise up and come to their defense. So Hilf al-Fudul, one of the ways that some people translate it is that it was, every other hilf and pact that came there, this was the most superior pact. Fudul meaning it was superior. It was better than any other thing that was made before. Why? Because every other pact and alliance had to do with tribal Arab stuff. So no, this one is based on actual fada'il. It's based on virtue and characteristics. And others say it's because of the people who took part in it. Abu Talib was a part of it, right? Many of the other members of Banu Hashim. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ala He himself was a part of this pact. Again, before the Bi'atha, before he came out openly as a prophet. So this is still Jahil pre-Islamic times. But he joined this pact, which is an area that we have to reflect upon too. So then of course they came to this person's aid and they said, this is our new pact amongst us and we'll go out and defend whoever needs us. And again, I think most of you have heard that latter part of the story. Now, let's go back to what we're talking about. Putting Abu Talib's support for the Prophet in this context. You see, every other alliance and pact that was happening there, again, you saw the chart, the way that these things broken down. This new pact broke families even more. There were some people who said, okay, this is a good pact, we'll join you. Those previous two ones that I mentioned, right? The blood liquors and the perfume ones. Those two pacts were there, and some of them said, fine. A few of them said, we'll join your new one, that sounds better. But a lot of them didn't. They said, this goes against our tribal teachings, our cultural teachings, what our families have taught us. We're not going to join something like this. If my clansman does injustice to somebody else, then I'm going to protect my own family, my own blood. I don't care if somebody was actually wronged or not. If my own family member is wrong, then yeah, because they're my blood, they're my tribe, they're part of my clan, then I'll fight. I'll go to war. But if it's some random person, I don't care. So a lot of people still stuck with that previous thing. And that was still, the majority opinion of the people of the time. That was the prevailing culture. Abu Talib, in that context, is saying what? This person now when Rasulullah comes out, he's part of this pact. He's coming out with a whole new mission. He's trying to destroy every single pillar of their cultural existence. In this climate, and I should mention this too, Abu Talib's position as somebody from Banu, the Quraysh, he had duties for the Kaaba too. Remember the two I mentioned, of Rifada and Siqaya. He was the one, when people would come, he would be in charge of hospitality. He would receive the guests, the Hujjaj, he would take care of them, he would provide water. And he did this with his own money. Even though he was a successful trader, because of him spending so much like this, he ended up becoming poor. Like he spent all his wealth in doing khidmat. Like many people do sometimes, they spend everything in the way of helping others. He did the same thing. Whereas the other tribesmen, they said, look, we can still buy influence and buy everything through the money that we have. Abu Talib wasn't able to do that. So he had this nobility from being in Quraysh. He was somebody which was one of the custodians and had a responsibility in a wadhifa for the Kaaba. But he didn't have that power and influence like everybody else. He didn't have that money. He couldn't call shots. But even in that climate, he stood out against his own customs. He stood out against his own family. He went out and supported somebody who was claiming a whole new religion, destroying everything else that they all stood for. And there's no one else to support him there. And that's what makes his sacrifice so much more, right? That's what makes his support so much more. The lesson for us is this, is that tomorrow night we'll be celebrating the Bi'atha, the Mab'ath, the beginning of the prophetic mission when the Prophet formally announced and started his mission, right? And there's a reason behind the Prophet's announcement, right? The mission of Islam, what is that? Pre-Islamically, before Islam is formally announced, we see Abu Talib and a few others, we see a certain trend among the ancestors of Rasulullah. They go against the cultural norms that are there. Even when the rest of the tribesmen and clansmen want to do one thing or want to say one thing, they refuse. right? None of them touched a sip of alcohol, even though it was fine in their culture. None of them, worshipped these idols, even though that was the prevailing culture. But some of them had power and wealth and armies, and they can back themselves up, and nobody could stand up against them. Abu Talib's difference is that he didn't have this. He lost this in trying to take care of everybody else. He decided, and it's still funny how people doubt the iman of Abu Talib. Say, look, what reason would Abu Talib have to protect somebody like Rasulullah if he didn't believe in him? If somebody wants to come back and say, no, it's for tribal reasons, like he went against his own tribe to do this. Oh, it's because of pacts that he made. His own pacts and alliances went against what everybody else was doing. You cannot say that this was because of some Arab genealogy or ancestry or other stuff. This could only be because of his iman in Rasulullah, because of his nephew. That's it. That's the only answer we have. And then, of course, you take a look at all the other context clues. And for us, we think about this. When we're putting into context how we are in this life, right? We think that we're trying to support and live up to the message of the Prophet and of Islam. Are there times where we're still sticking by un-Islamic or non-Islamic values? And there's two ways you can look at that, right? It may be sometimes Eastern values or cultural values. Sometimes we do allow that to supersede clear Islamic values and traits. It does happen sometimes. On the other side, you do see people who are now putting Western values above Islamic values too. So it goes both ways. The one thing we have to reflect on is, okay, what are actual Islamic values in the first place? I've heard some speakers, when they mention the story of Abu Talib and this idea of Hilf al-Fudul and Abu Talib's support, they mention this famous hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That the Prophet is reported to have said that, so after Islam now becomes the main religion, there's one report that said that even if somebody made something similar to Hilf al-Fudul right now, like now that Islam is the dominant religion and culture, I would still join because there was good reason behind it, right? It was something virtuous. There was fada'il there, right? It was good. So people use this and say, look, this means that we don't have to care about people's religions and what they believe in. Like, who cares? The Prophet joined a pact and alliance with people who were quote unquote non-Muslim. Like Islam didn't matter there. It was the virtues that mattered. So people, again, they use the analysis here to say, see, religion doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's people's values and traits. We say, okay, maybe that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it might be that if somebody knows true Islamic values, they know which pacts, which alliances, which organizations, which movements, which things they should actually be a part of. Rather than saying, you know what, there's some organization or group right now, some political or group or organization that has a bunch of non-Islamic values and maybe one or two good values, and maybe I can just work with them. Lesser of all evils kind of idea. For people like Abu Talib, it wasn't that case. They said, look, we are only going to stand up for values which are, we would call Islamic values, the Tawheedi values. If not, then we're not going to stand with it. We don't mix values like that. And think about it in terms of the modern sort of political landscape. Right now we have Muslim politicians. And when people mention this and they talk about how great it is, representation, etc., I say, look at the actual values that they stand for, and you tell me which of their values are actually Islamic in nature, and how many of their values are they actually sacrificing for their quote-unquote greater good. Which countries do they refuse to speak out against because, well, sorry, I can't because so-and-so country has a strong political action committee and they're going to shut me down. I can't say anything. Well, so-and-so, I'm part of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and I can't say this or I can't say that because I'm part of the party. I can't do anything about it. So I have to stand with this alliance or that alliance. Like, okay, if you want to do that, fine. But are you actually living, and standing true to your Islamic values or not? Or are you taking on other people's values and saying, I'm living for that, and I'm, once in a while I'll put on a hijab or a scarf or something like that, or, I'll swear, when I get sworn in, I'll do it on a Quran. Like, that's all superficial stuff. Where are the actual Islamic values in your heart that are informing your decisions and informing your speech? Like when conservative Christians or religious, Zionists, when they come to the forefront, they fully speak their mind about their issues. They won't hide the fact that they, support Zionism and that everything should be done in support of Zionism. Conservative Christians say our religion informs our ideas, so we're against abortion or whatever it happens to be. But Muslims seem to say, you know what? I'd rather just be a secularist. I'm going to put my Islam right in the trash. I'll keep it at home. I'm going to be somebody else when I go outside. What we should be learning from a story like this is that we'll be part of an alliance or a pact or an organization if they are truly ones which stick to Islamic values. If not, then are we actually living under the shadows and through the role model of Abu Talib or not? All right, something for us to think about on this night. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And we can, hopefully with this background, understand a bit more why this year where the Prophet loses Bibi Khadija, he loses Abu Talib, why this is the year Aam al-Huzn. Why is this a year of depression and grief for him? What's so heartbreaking there? It's because the two main people that were his supporters, financially, emotionally, spiritually, physically, culturally, everything was in Bibi Khadija and Abu Talib. They were the ones pushing against everything else in society. Bibi Khadija lost her full status because of her supporting Rasulullah. Abu Talib lost his same status too. They gave up everything when there was no support there, when it wasn't fashionable to do so. This is why when Abu Talib passed, Rasulullah was heartbroken. It destroyed him completely. And it's amazing some of the narrations that we have regarding the lead up to Abu Talib taking care of Rasulullah. We have the famous ones where when Abdul Muttalib was on his deathbed, right? Because he had initially been taking care of the Prophet, of course, after Bibi Amina had died. And when that happened, Abdul Muttalib, he had taken care of him for a few years, then now he's on his deathbed. And of course, he had looked after Rasulullah as his own son. So after he had given his wasiyah and mentioned his final will and desires to all his other children, he called Abu Talib close to him. And he said, I need you to make sure you take extra special care of Muhammad. I need you to love him like you haven't loved anybody else before. And some narrations say that Abu Talib was offended. He says, Abada, he's like, I can't believe you would say something like that to me. He says, I have more love for Muhammad than my own children. He says, you and I both know, and they say this is where they had to speak in kind of codes. We both know that he's destined for greatness. We both know what his mission will be. So yes, I will take care of him. I will protect him. I will do everything, and I will show him more love and support than even my own children. And that's exactly what Abu Talib did. When he would rest, when he would go to sleep at night, rather than laying down and sleeping and taking naps with his own children, Rasulullah would be with him. Whenever the dastarkhan and the sufra would be there and food would be put out, when all the other children would be seated and get ready to eat, they'd pick up their food. Abu Talib was there. He says, wait. My Muhammad is not here yet. Wait for him. Don't pick up and don't even eat the food until my Muhammad comes. They wouldn't eat until Muhammad came, when Rasulullah came. When the news came, they say Imam Ali comes to Rasulullah and gives him the news of Abu Talib's passing. And they say that we physically saw the pain on Rasulullah. It hurt him physically. He ordered Imam Ali, he said, go perform the ghusl, perform the rites, and once you've performed all this and we're ready for the burial, then come back to me. It's almost as if the Prophet said, I need to be alone in my own thoughts while I mourn, while you do the duties. And they say while he was alone, thinking to himself, the historians report that he calls out to Abu Talib saying, وَصَلَتْكَ رَحْمٌ يَا عَمْ, that rahmat, mercy now comes to you, O uncle. وَجَزَيْتَ خَيْرًا, now you'll be given all these great rewards. فَلَقَدْ رَبَيْتَ, you took care of me, you were like a Rabb to me, you nurtured me. وَكَفَلْتَ صَغِيرًا, you protected me, you were my guardian when I was a child. وَنَصَرْتَ وَأَزَرْتَ كَبِيرًا, you nurtured me and helped me grow into the adult that I am now. And after saying all of this, Imam Ali comes back and he tells them that the ghusl is finished, now we're ready to go and bury him. So they go and they bury Abu Talib. When he's there, then they say Rasulullah cries out loud, Ama wallah la astaghfaranna laka wa ashfa'anna fika shafa'atan ya'jubu laha thaqalan. He says, I swear to Allah that I will be praying for your forgiveness. I will do so much shafa'ah for you that even the jinn and insan, everyone in existence will be ajib, and they'll say, what kind of shafa'ah is Rasulullah giving to somebody like this? They will be so shocked at the amount of love that I'm expressing for my uncle here. Imagine how, when this happened, they say that Jibreel then descended to Rasulullah. He came down to Rasulullah and said, Rasulullah, now that you have lost your last support in Makkah, you have to leave this place. There's nothing left for you here. There's no support for you left in Makkah. And when we hear these words, that there is no support left for somebody, it can only remind us of the same thing that happened to Imam Hussein when he goes out to his final support in Karbala on Ashura, when he's there in the battlefield, when he loses his Alamdar, when he loses Abbas, he utters the same lines, Al-an in kasarat dhahri, now I have no one to support me, my back has been shattered. Ala la'natullah ala qawmi zalimin wa saya'lamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalabin yanqalibun. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un ridan biqada'ihi wa tasliman li amri. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا، ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے، ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے پکارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا، مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ کر ہے تماچے مارے، مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ کر ہے تماچے مارے، میں نے سرشمر سے مانگا جو تمہارا بابا، جو مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا جو دریا پہنے تحفے میں مجھے بخشے تھے، وہ جو دریا پہنے تحفے میں مجھے بخشے تھے، ان کو بے دردی سے ظالم نے اتارا بابا، جو مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا، آپ کے سینے پہ آرام سے سونے والی، آپ کے سینے پہ آرام سے سونے والی، سوکھے ابقا کے پہ کرتی ہیں گزارا بابا، جو مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا، جو مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا۔
الفاتحہ۔
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح نبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة. لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرزي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ملد كلمة التقوى وعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبيا بكم موقن بشرع ديني وخواتيم عملي وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداءه. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الزكي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله بأبي أنتم وأمي. طبتم وتابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما. فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوسيين. السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما وأقدمهم إيمانا وأقومهم بدين الله وأهوتهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك فنعم الأخ المواسي. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتهكت حرمة الإسلام. فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر والأخ الدافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعة ربه الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل. والحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. اللهم إني تعرضت لزيارة أوليائك رغبة في ثوابك ورجاء لمغفرتك وجزيل إحسانك. فأسألك أن تصلي على محمد وآله الطاهرين وأن تجعل رزقي بهم دارا وعيشي بهم قارا وزيارتي بهم مقبولة وحياتي بهم طيبة وأدرجني إدراج المكرمين واجعلني ممن ينقلب من زيارة مشاهد أحبائك مفلحا منجها قد استوجب غفران الذنوب وستر العيوب وكشف الكروب. إنك أهل التقوى وأهل المغفرة. السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي الباقر وجعفر بن محمد الصادق وموسى بن جعفر القادم وعلي بن موسى الرضا ومحمد بن علي التقي وعلي بن محمد النقي والحسن بن علي العسكري. السلام عليك يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. أجر الله فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.